Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Flight Lieutenant Philippa Nielsen. We are honoured to acknowledge General David L. Goldfin, Chief of Staff, US Air Force, and Mrs. Dawn Goldfin, Air Marshal Mel Hupfeld, Chief of Air Force, and Mrs. Louise Hupfeld, and the accompanying delegation. We warmly welcome the US Congressional Staff Delegation, also attending this evening's ceremony. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of the following schools: from New South Wales, Woodbury Public School and Drummoyne Public School; from Western Australia, Halls Head College; and from the Northern Territory, Waggaman Primary School. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Please stand. Students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Sergeant Charles James Durham. Charles Durham was born in 1892, the eldest son of Alfred and Maggie Durham of the Melbourne suburb of Coburg. He attended Coburg State School and later worked as a clerk at the Melbourne Safe Deposit Company. Durham enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 3rd of July 1915 and commenced training at the Broadmeadows camp near Melbourne. He was one of 4 members of his extended family to serve for Australia in the First World War. On the 27th of September 1915, Durham sailed with reinforcements for the 14th Infantry Battalion from Melbourne to Egypt, where he continued training and preparing for war on the Western Front. He was in Egypt during a time of rapid expansion and reorganisation of the Australian forces, known as the doubling of the AIF. During this period, he was severely reprimanded for being away without leave for over a month. He did, however, eventually return to his unit and afterwards served with distinction and would be promoted several times. In June 1916, he sailed to France, and just over 1 month later, he fought in the Battle of Pozières near the Somme River. In this battle, Australian forces suffered over 23,000 casualties in 6 weeks of fighting. In early October 1916, Durham was briefly hospitalised with influenza. He rejoined his unit as they were resting and training behind the lines near Steenvoorde in northern France, near the border with Belgium. On the 8th of December 1916, Durham was recommended for inclusion in the Commander-in-Chief's congratulatory card for his excellent work in maintaining communications during a battle in which the Australian forces were stuck between 2 German strongpoints. In April 1917, Durham and the 14th Battalion took part in the First Battle of Bullecourt, an attempt to capture a German strongpoint on their defensive Hindenburg Line. Australian forces suffered over 3,000 casualties in a single day. After Bullecourt, Durham was promoted several times. In April 1917 to Lance Corporal, in July to Corporal, and in March 1918, after a brief period of time in hospital with scabies, to the rank of Sergeant. On the 13th of May 1918, Durham and the 14th Infantry Battalion were manning the frontline trenches near Villers-Bretonneux, following the successful Australian recapture of the town. When this sector of the front came under a heavy German high explosive and shrapnel artillery attack, Durham was killed, the only man from his battalion to fall on that day. He was buried in the Adelaide Cemetery at Villers-Bretonneux, where 960 Commonwealth soldiers of the First World War now lie. His grieving parents left the inscription on his grave, "Until the day dawns and the shadows flee away." He was 25 years old. Sergeant Charles James Durham's name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Sergeant Charles James Durham, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.